This mansion didn't show power, it controlled it. The iron gates still remember the sound of carriage wheels. They once groaned open at dawn and closed long after midnight, not to keep the world out, but to control who was allowed in. Beyond them rises a mansion built less like a home and more like a statement, a declaration carved in limestone and ambition. It stands on acres of manicured land that once echoed with orchestras, gossip, and the quiet calculations of power. This was not simply a residence of the Gilded Age, it was a command center. When construction began, America was redefining itself. Railroads stitched the nation together, factories roared night and day, and fortunes appeared almost overnight. This mansion emerged from that turbulence as a symbol of arrival. European palaces were studied, measured, and reimagined. Craftsmen were imported, materials shipped across oceans, and entire industries bent themselves around the demands of a single project. Nothing here was accidental. Every stone, every corridor, every window was designed to impress before a single word was spoken. The exterior alone tells a story of confidence bordering on defiance. Towering facades stretch wide, signaling permanence in a country still unsure of its future. Balconies overlook gardens laid out with mathematical precision, where symmetry was power, and nature itself was disciplined. Visitors approaching the front entrance would already understand the hierarchy. This was a place where you arrived knowing your place, long before you crossed the threshold. Inside, the scale becomes almost disorienting. Ceilings soar far above reach, painted and gilded to catch light from chandeliers heavy enough to require reinforced beams. Marble floors reflect footsteps like whispers, reminding guests that nothing here went unnoticed. The grand hall functions less as a welcoming space and more as a stage. It was built to frame entrances, to allow pauses, to give time for eyes to travel upward and outward, and absorb the message: wealth, authority, control. Rooms unfold one after another, each with its own purpose and personality. A library lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes signals intellect and refinement, even if many books were never opened. A dining room stretches long enough to seat dozens, where meals lasted for hours and conversations shaped industries. Behind the walls, hidden passages allowed servants to move silently, ensuring that power appeared effortless. The architecture itself enforced separation, visibility for some, invisibility for others. Technology, cutting edge for its time, is woven seamlessly into the opulence. While much of America still relied on candles and coal stoves, this mansion boasted electric lighting, indoor plumbing, and advanced heating systems. Comfort was not a luxury here, it was an expectation. These innovations were not merely practical but symbolic, proof that the future had already arrived within these walls, even if it remained distant for everyone else. The ballroom stands as the emotional core of the house. Designed for spectacle, it once pulsed with music and movement, hosting gatherings that defined social seasons. Crystal glasses clinked under glittering lights as alliances formed and reputations rose or fell over the course of a single evening. Attendance alone was a form of validation. To be seen here meant relevance. To be excluded meant obscurity. The room remembers it all: the laughter, the tension, the silent competitions unfolding behind polite smiles. Beyond the public spaces lie private chambers that reveal another layer of the story. Bedrooms more spacious than most homes, dressing rooms lined with mirrors, bathrooms adorned with imported fixtures. These were sanctuaries built not for rest alone, but for preparation. Every day began with presentation. Every appearance was curated. Even solitude here was wrapped in excess. Outside, the estate functioned like a small kingdom. Stables, greenhouses, staff quarters, and service buildings operated in constant motion. Hundreds of people worked to maintain the illusion of ease. Their lives were structured around schedules dictated by dinners, parties, and seasonal migrations between city and countryside. The mansion was never truly asleep. It breathed through its staff, its furnaces, its endless routines. Yet beneath the grandeur, there is an undercurrent of tension. The Gilded Age was an era of extremes, and this mansion stood at the peak of that imbalance. While its halls gleamed, labor strikes erupted beyond the gates. While banquets overflowed, tenements crowded with families struggled to survive. The mansion absorbed none of that hardship directly, but it existed because of it. Its walls insulated not just against weather, but against reality. Time, however, is indifferent to power. As decades passed, tastes shifted. The sheer scale that once impressed began to feel burdensome. Maintenance costs soared, staff numbers dwindled, and rooms fell silent. Echoes replaced orchestras. Chandeliers dimmed. What was once a living symbol of dominance became a monument to a vanished world. Today, walking through the mansion is like moving through layers of history frozen in place. The craftsmanship remains breathtaking, but the context has changed. Visitors no longer arrive seeking favor or influence. They come to understand how power once looked, how it was displayed, and how it ultimately faded. The mansion no longer commands the nation's economy or social order, but it still commands attention. Every staircase worn smooth by countless footsteps, every door handle polished by generations of hands, every window framing views unchanged by time contributes to the narrative. This is not just a building, it is a record of ambition made solid, of an era when wealth sought to immortalize itself in stone and gold. The mansion stands now as a question as much as an answer. It asks what power means, how it is built, and how long it lasts. It invites reflection without offering comfort. The silence inside is not empty. It is full of stories still hanging in the air, waiting to be noticed by those willing to look past the splendor and listen closely to what the walls have never stopped saying. The mansion was never meant to be simply lived in. From the moment its foundations were laid, it was designed to speak before anyone inside ever did. In an age when power was measured not only by wealth but by visibility, architecture became a language, and this house was written fluently in it. Every element, from its commanding exterior to the carefully orchestrated interiors, existed to make power tangible, undeniable, and unforgettable. Its sheer scale was the first message. Rising above the surrounding landscape, the structure asserted permanence in a nation still shaping its identity. This was not a modest estate tucked discreetly away. It was positioned to be seen, to dominate the horizon, and to announce that its presence was intentional. In a time when fortunes were newly formed and legitimacy was still being claimed, size itself became authority. The larger the structure, the stronger the claim that this power was here to stay. Approach mattered just as much as arrival. Long drives and controlled sightlines forced visitors into a slow procession, allowing anticipation to build. The journey toward the entrance was part of the performance, ensuring that by the time one reached the doors, the hierarchy was already established. The building did not welcome, it evaluated. It measured who was approaching and how they would perceive themselves once they crossed into its domain. Inside, power was refined rather than softened. Grand halls stretched outward with deliberate symmetry, encouraging eyes to lift and bodies to feel small. Ceilings soared not for comfort, but for effect, making conversations feel hushed and movements restrained. These spaces were carefully calibrated to inspire awe, because awe creates compliance. When people are impressed, they are less likely to challenge what stands before them. The arrangement of rooms reinforced social order. Public spaces were expansive, polished, and richly decorated, while private areas retreated into controlled seclusion. Access it. Self became a privilege. Who was allowed beyond certain thresholds spoke volumes about status and trust. Power here was not shouted. It was managed quietly through spatial design, through the simple act of allowing or denying entry. Materials carried their own symbolism. Imported marble, rare woods, and intricate metalwork were not chosen solely for beauty, but for what they represented. Each surface told a story of reach and influence, of global connections and economic command. To walk across these floors was to step upon evidence of networks that extended far beyond the walls, into quarries, forests, and workshops across continents. Technology further elevated this message. Advanced systems for lighting, heating, and water were integrated seamlessly, presenting modernity as a natural extension of authority. While much of the population lived without these comforts, Here they functioned quietly in the background, reinforcing the idea that progress belonged to those who could afford it. Power was not just visible, it was efficient, smooth, and untroubled. Even decoration played a strategic role. Portraits, tapestries, and sculptures were positioned to remind visitors of lineage, success, and cultural sophistication. These were visual arguments, suggesting that power was not accidental but earned, cultivated, and justified. Art became evidence, not expression. It existed to validate the structure's purpose and the status it upheld. Social events transformed the mansion into a living theater of influence. Dinners, receptions, and gatherings were not casual affairs, but calculated moments of display. Seating arrangements, lighting, and acoustics were all designed to facilitate observation and control. Who spoke, who listened, and who was noticed were all subtly directed by the space itself. The mansion shaped behavior as much as it hosted it. Behind the scenes, a hidden world ensured that power appeared effortless. Service corridors, concealed staircases, and carefully timed routines allowed the machinery of the household to operate without disrupting the illusion. The absence of visible labor reinforced the myth that authority required no effort, that wealth naturally produced order and elegance without strain. Over time, the building became synonymous with influence. Decisions made within its walls rippled outward, affecting industries, communities, and markets. Its rooms witnessed negotiations that shaped futures far beyond the estate. The mansion did not simply reflect power, it amplified it, giving physical form to abstract authority and anchoring it in stone and space. Yet this visibility was also a form of vulnerability. By embodying power so completely, the mansion tied its identity to an era, a mindset, and a belief system that could not last forever. As society evolved, the very features that once commanded respect began to feel excessive, even unsettling. What was once admired as confidence later appeared as overreach. Still, the building remains a testament to a moment when power sought permanence through design. It shows how wealth used architecture to legitimize itself, to demand recognition, and to shape perception. Within these walls, power was not hidden or subtle. It was engineered, displayed, and lived in every corridor, every room, every carefully planned silence. The splendor of the mansion depended on a world that rarely appeared in its polished reflections. Every chandelier that sparkled above a banquet table, every carpet softened beneath expensive shoes, was supported by lives that moved in the shadows. The luxury on display was inseparable from contrast, because the wealth that made such excess possible was drawn from a society deeply divided by opportunity, labor, and power. While guests marveled at imported stone and rare wood, thousands of workers beyond the gates lived in conditions that could not have been more different. Factories ran long hours, rail lines stretched endlessly, and hands were worn down by repetition and risk. The mansion absorbed the profits of this labor without acknowledging its source. Its beauty concealed the strain that fueled it, turning human effort into invisible capital. Inside the estate, the divide was just as carefully managed. Servants moved through concealed passages, emerging only when needed and disappearing just as quickly. Their presence was constant, yet their visibility was controlled. This separation preserved the illusion that luxury functioned effortlessly, that meals appeared on time and rooms remained pristine by some natural order, rather than by relentless work. Comfort was maintained by erasing the people who created it. Daily life within the mansion depended on strict hierarchy. Each role was defined, each movement regulated by unspoken rules. A glance, a tone, or a delayed response could carry consequences. The structure of the house reinforced this system, ensuring that those who served remained physically and socially distant from those they served. Walls, doors, and staircases were not just architectural features, they were tools of division. Beyond the estate, the contrast grew sharper. Urban neighborhoods swelled with workers seeking opportunity, many living in overcrowded housing with little access to sanitation or security. Children labored alongside adults, their futures narrowed by necessity. Meanwhile, within the mansion's walls, excess was normalized. Food was abundant, time was leisurely, and resources were consumed without question. The two realities existed simultaneously, connected by economics but separated by experience. The Gilded Age celebrated progress, but progress was unevenly distributed. Technological advancements that made life easier inside the mansion often intensified labor elsewhere. Machines increased productivity, but they also increased expectations, driving longer hours and harsher conditions. The comforts enjoyed by a few were directly linked to the pressures placed on many. Luxury did not exist in isolation, it was built upon imbalance. Social gatherings at the mansion often masked this disparity beneath elegance and etiquette. Conversations flowed over fine china and crystal glasses, rarely acknowledging the conditions beyond the gates. Wealth insulated its holders from discomfort, allowing them to discuss ideals while remaining untouched by their consequences. The mansion became a place where inequality was not denied but simply excluded from view. Even the grounds reflected this contrast. Manicured gardens required constant upkeep, their perfection maintained through disciplined labor. Nature was shaped and controlled, mirroring how society itself was organized. What appeared effortless was the result of continuous intervention. Beauty was sustained by pressure, both environmental and human. Over time, cracks in this system began to show. Labor movements gained momentum, questioning the fairness of a society that produced such extremes. Strikes and protests challenged the assumption that wealth alone justified privilege. While the mansion stood unchanged, the world around it began to shift, and the contrast it embodied grew harder to ignore. The building, once admired purely for its grandeur, gradually became a symbol of excess. Its scale and opulence invited scrutiny, prompting questions about responsibility and ethics. What had once represented success now also represented imbalance. The mansion did not change, but the values surrounding it did, transforming perception into critique. Yet even as attitudes evolved, the physical reality remained. The mansion continued to showcase the heights of luxury, while its history quietly preserved the story of those who made it possible. The contrast between opulence and hardship was not an accident of the era, it was a defining feature. To understand the mansion fully requires acknowledging both sides of its existence, the brilliance that dazzled and the labor that sustained it, intertwined and inseparable within the same walls. What once stood as an unshakable declaration of power gradually became something far quieter. The mansion was built with the belief that wealth, when translated into stone and scale, could resist time itself. Its walls were meant to outlast generations, to fix influence in place long after its creators were gone. For a while, that belief appeared justified. The house dominated its surroundings, its presence unquestioned, its authority assumed. But time does not respond to ambition. As years passed, the world beyond the gates began to change in ways the mansion could not control. Industries that once fueled its existence shifted or declined. New centers of power emerged elsewhere, less dependent on physical display and more on speed, information, and adaptability. The mansion, designed for permanence, found itself increasingly out of step with a society that was learning to move faster and lighter. The very scale that once impressed began to weigh heavily. Rooms built to host grand gatherings sat empty more often than not. Corridors echoed with absence rather than conversation. Maintaining such a vast structure required resources and labor that no longer aligned with modern priorities. What was once a symbol of ease became a responsibility, a reminder that excess carries long-term costs. Cultural values shifted as well. The grandeur that once inspired admiration began to provoke questions. In an age more aware of inequality and social responsibility, the mansion's extravagance felt distant, even uncomfortable. It no longer represented progress but a past defined by imbalance. The building did not change, but the lens through which it was viewed did, transforming celebration into critique. Technological advancements further accelerated this shift. Comforts that were once exclusive became accessible to many. Electricity, heating, and plumbing no longer signified elite status. Innovation moved beyond architecture, finding expression in mobility, communication, and digital influence. The mansion's cutting-edge features faded into background expectations, stripped of their symbolic power, as the social circles that ONCE defined the estate dissolved. The house lost its role as a gathering place for influence. Decisions shaping the future were no longer made in ballrooms and dining halls. Power migrated to offices, networks, and institutions far removed from chandeliers and marble floors. The mansion remained, but its relevance diminished. Neglect crept in quietly. Without constant use and investment, details dulled, finishes aged, fabrics faded, and systems designed for continuous operation fell silent. The structure endured, but its vitality waned. The house transitioned from living environment artifact, preserved more for memory than function. Yet in this transformation, a new kind of significance emerged. Freed from its original purpose, the mansion became a lens through which to examine an era. Its rooms offered insight into how power once presented itself and why that presentation eventually failed. The silence invited reflection, encouraging visitors to consider the relationship between wealth, influence, and time. The mansion's survival is not a victory of dominance, but a lesson in impermanence. It stands not as proof that power endures, but that it changes form. What was once central became peripheral. What once demanded attention now asks for understanding. Through this shift, the building reveals a quiet truth. Grandeur can slow decay, but it cannot stop it. Authority can be expressed in architecture, but it cannot be preserved there indefinitely. The mansion remains impressive, but its power now lies in what it teaches, rather than what it controls. The mansion's story is ultimately not about stone, wealth, or ornament, but about the human desire to make power permanent. It reveals how an era believed authority could be designed, controlled, and preserved through scale and spectacle. For a time that belief worked. The building commanded attention, shaped behavior, and stood as an unquestioned symbol of dominance. Yet as the world evolved, the mansion remained fixed, and in that stillness its meaning shifted. What once projected strength now invites reflection, showing how easily power outpaces the structures built to contain it. The house endures not because it still rules, but because it reminds us that influence is always temporary, and the louder it is proclaimed, the more quietly it eventually fades into history.